on the call from PTAC right now. We don't have a quorum, so Adam, I'm happy to wait a little bit longer, see if people come.
Yeah, that sounds good. I know I heard from August that he won't be able to make it, but I haven't heard from anyone else, so we can give it a little bit.
No. I assume we don't have anyone in the room with you?
And other than Lance, no.
Okay.
Lance Fay, and Austin Stifler here in attendance, so just that all sound good to you? We'll mark them as present and then
Acknowledged, yes.
take notes still.
And thank you, Margaretta and Ginger, for attending as well.
Okay. Well, yes, happy to jump into a discussion about Lawrence Transit on Demand. We're very excited that we have worked through some of our process to be ready to launch microtransit services that will ultimately be used for Sunday service as well, but we plan to start using this new technology to enhance our existing overnight service currently called Nightline. So let me jump into presentation. Okay. So, talking about service launch for Lawrence Transit On Demand, which is the brand name we are using for this microtransit service. A little bit about the background of this project. So, in our route redesign study in 2021, microtransit was identified as a service option that would certainly be useful on Sundays. It can be implemented citywide with less revenue hours than it takes to run fixed routes everywhere. We also did explore the use of microtransit service in zones throughout the city, potentially overlapping with fixed routes. We didn't quite have the available funds or service hours to do that from the start, but we are able to implement it not only on Sundays, but as well as our existing overnight hours that we use for Nightline. So just to clarify the term microtransit, it is an Uber-like transit service. So riders are using their smartphone apps or a phone call to talk with one of our dispatchers and book a ride. If you've used Uber or Lyft and are using a smartphone, you'll see the vehicle approaching on a map, so you know real-time vehicle location. It'll give you estimates of how long it's going to take to get to your destination. This project was supported by a grant that we were awarded through KDOT in 2022, the AIC program, or Access, Innovation, and Collaboration program, awarded the software costs that we are looking at. So it's a little over $157,000 project. A bulk of that is covered by federal funds, and that cost actually helps us cover 4 years of service. So when we were applying for this grant, we were fairly certain, but not completely certain, that we would not need any additional hardware. But we did apply with funds that could have covered some of that cost if needed. Ultimately, the grant funds are just going towards software, kind of annual software as a service costs. So that really allowed us to extend how much value we got for that from that grant. So June of 2023 was when we signed our contract and all the work started with Spare, the company that we're working with. And so from June of this year all the way through June of 2027, we've got this project covered, which gives us a lot of good flexibility moving forward to budget appropriately in future years. And as I mentioned, no additional hardware was needed. Just to be clear, so we've had Nightline service for quite a long time. It's an overnight service that operates throughout the city of Lawrence. It provides curb-to-curb trips, we say, so any point to any point in Lawrence. It currently, you can only access it by calling to make a reservation during business hours, Monday through Friday, from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So with this new software capability, we're essentially rebranding this service, calling it Lawrence Transit On Demand. It's a service that right now will operate overnights from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., Monday through Saturday. And this same service will ultimately also operate on Sundays once we hit the new year and have routes redesigned and that capability. But people's experience with using this service overnight and using it on Sundays will be the same phone app. It will be the same dispatchers if you're calling instead of using an app, and the same kind of experience depending on which either time that you're using it. So our implementation for overnights will begin next week. Next Wednesday, the 20th, is when we're targeting for this service to be available, starting at 8 p.m. that night. So again, it'll operate overnights from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. To back up slightly and provide a little context, Nightline right now is used primarily by shift workers in town. It's a lot of people who have pretty regular trips that they expect to take when we don't have fixed route service. So if they're going to or from a shift, at the East Hills Business Park or up in North Lawrence by Berry Plastics and all the businesses up that way. There's a lot of shifts that start or end around 11 p.m. There's also a lot of start and end around 4 or 5 a.m. So lots of people are using Nightline service that way today. We expect those people to continue to use the service under Lawrence Transit on Demand. The new opportunity is for people in the middle of the night who may need a trip. If you think about people getting safely home from bars or restaurants, if you think about other late night trips where people haven't planned ahead to be needing a trip, we expect that our vehicles will get some more activity with the new phone application available. Looking ahead, that first week in January is when Lawrence Transit on Demand will become available on Sundays as well, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So the reason why we have to wait until the new year is because with redesigned bus routes, we will recapture revenue hours that will be used on Sundays. So even though we have the technology today, we don't have the service hours, the budget for the service hours to start Sunday just yet. Also wanted to mention, actually, when this slide was created, Android was the app that we were waiting on. We're now waiting on iPhone app availability. So our Android app actually is available. If you're an Android user and you search Lawrence Transit on Demand, you should be able to download the app and create your user profile today. You won't be able to book any trips until the 20th. So we still have to wait until we officially launch the service next week. But hopefully in the next day or two, iOS the app should be completely through that process, and we'll be ready to start marketing for the service, for people to get signed up for the service. This is one of the marketing tools that Spare provided to us. There's a number of different images they gave for us to use, primarily on social media, to help people understand kind of how to use this new service if they're using the app version of it. So three primary steps. After you download the app, you are scheduling a ride by typing in where you want to go to. The algorithm is telling a driver where you're at, so it can come pick you up, and then it's taking you to your destination following the route that's on your phone. This service will be a completely shared ride service, so you won't have the ability to say that you have to ride alone. You may very well take trips where no one else ends up sharing a ride with you, but general public service, it's always allowed for trips to be shared. So there may be times people find when they start using the service that if someone is generally on the way to where they're headed, the bus might stop and pick up someone else while it's heading to drop you off. So that'll be the same scenario overnights and Sundays when it comes around in the new year. Just some other notes about the service. An hour of a driver on Lawrence Transit on Demand costs about the same as an hour of a driver on fixed route service. So service will be fare free, the same as the rest of our service today. The way we're able to limit cost on a service like this is by setting a cap on the actual revenue hours we provide. So we certainly want to keep wait times at 15 or 20 minutes, no more than 20 minutes, hopefully. But if the use of this service skyrockets, people would experience higher wait times just because we essentially can only afford to have so many vehicles out at once, unless we decided to pull revenue hours from another part of our service, like fixed route. So that's one of the ways with fare-free service we're able to control cost on this particular service. Just want to reiterate for accessibility reasons that it's not required that people use the smartphone app to still access this service, whether it's overnight or Sundays. Could be for accessibility reasons. It could be for just people not feeling comfortable or wanting to use that type of technology. But it will still be accessible by calling during our business hours to schedule a ride, which is the same as Nightline today. So we won't be able to add additional reservationist staffing overnight. So we aren't going to be able to have people give us a phone call at 10 or 11 p.m. to schedule a trip. But that's the same as what we face today. So there's still that accessibility, at least at the baseline that we offer today. And I believe that's the end of the content I have for this. I'm happy to go back to anything or answer any questions anybody might have.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Lance.
Adam.
Yeah, Lance Fay, PTAC here. I got a couple of clarifications I'd like to hear. You are using the same paratransit vehicles for this service, correct?
Correct. So they're all going to be cutaway vehicles. They will be a mix of some paratransit vehicles and a couple of cutaways that we use in fixed route service.
Okay.
We'll be trying to get, we're trying to ensure that bike racks are available on all the vehicles, because that's one thing that doesn't exist
Yeah.
on all paras.
Accessibility for people with physical disabilities.
Sure, yes.
Whether it be a scooter or wheelchair or just need help getting on the bus, so you'll have that accessibility. Okay.
Yeah, everything will have lift available for a wheelchair.
The next thing would be currently after midnight on Saturday, Nightline services don't work. Is that going to continue for the rest of this year?
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification. So for the rest of this calendar year, this service will only run until midnight on Saturday.
Okay.
And starting in 2024, when Sunday service begins, we will extend the night service over from Saturday to Sunday at 6 a.m.
Okay.
And then we'll pick back up Sunday service 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. that day. So there will be a couple-hour gap in between when the night service ends and the Sunday day service begins.
Okay. There was one other question I had, and it just escaped me. It was also a small detail. So currently you can schedule, say, a few rides at a time. So for someone, say, that works every night at midnight, they can schedule ahead of time. Will they not be able to do that anymore with this app, or can you still schedule like 2 to 5 days in advance?
Yeah, you can still schedule recurring trips. So the system will allow, you'll have to call a reservationist to make that happen. That's the same way as it is today, but people can schedule up to 5 days in advance, and it can be a recurring trip. The system does prioritize those subscription trips, we call them, or recurring trips, over kind of the on-demand version. So in the instance that someone, Monday through Friday, they're trying to get to work at 11 p.m., they won't have to fear that on-demand trips will slow them down so much that they'll miss the start of work, for example.
Okay.
So there will be some priority set there.
Thanks for your questions, Lance. Alan, Austin, do either of you have anything you want to ask? Nope. Okay. Margaretta, Ginger, go ahead.
I was just going to add that this is the same platform that KU students are using for Safe Ride, and I really love how it works on the back end, but we did get some clarification that since we have two different builds, students will have to have both apps and sign into them separately in order to use On Demand, just so that you're aware.
Okay. Thank you, Margaretta. We have someone from public in attendance. JT, do you have anything you want to ask or add on this topic since you just came in?
Yes, thank you. I've got a question, probably a follow-up, depending on the answer. What about Amtrak?
As far as using the service to access Amtrak?
either arriving or departing.
Yeah, so it should improve that situation. So we've worked with some people who use existing Nightline to get to Amtrak. It can be a challenge because you have to book Nightline during business hours today, and Amtrak is often late or can be late. So this service, because it's on demand, people should be able to watch their Amtrak train and have a little more comfort that they'll take their bus trip using Lawrence Transit on Demand when they need to arrive at Amtrak, without too much extra waiting time.
Boy, I don't see how it's practical. Let's say that you're an Amtrak rider arriving, even if you're on time. Well, if you're on time, if they're a stranger to Lawrence and they don't know anything about this, it used to be that there was an attendant there that would try and help those who are arriving and are looking for a ride within Lawrence, that they get some guidance on who to call. But I was there one night, for example, and a train arrived and it was on time, and there was a gal there that needed a ride, and the attendant couldn't seem to get her a ride, whether it was a taxi or this service, if it was even available then. And she wound up calling her brother. And I was talking to her because she was a very interesting gal with a lot of Lawrence history. I'd never met her. And at any rate, she arranged a ride. And so I continued to talk to her. And then by and by I said, well, when's your ride going to arrive here? She said, well, he's coming from Lenexa. And she lived at 9th and New Hampshire. So, heck, I would have given her a ride in that case. But so, what are the realities for somebody that's arriving if they do or do not know about? This is a major transportation mode coming into Lawrence, and it's unfortunate that it's not always timely, but how to make the most of that.
So let me take a first crack at it, Margareta. So this service would be able to help someone like that. Now, your question about how do they learn about the service, I think we'll have to understand what sort of, we can't necessarily affect whether or not there's an attendant up at the Santa Fe Depot. We could investigate if there's the availability for us to post information about this service outside the building where someone would spot it after they get off a train. That would let them know, here's the app you download, and if you request a trip from us, we would expect a vehicle to be to that depot within 10 or 15 minutes based on the service we're putting out. So, there's two different things going on there. One of them is we have to inform people about the service. The other one, I think, is a solution we're looking for, where on demand, someone can get a trip in the middle of the night, no matter what time they request it.
And but that's only through the app?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, certainly signage at the station itself would be I would think that'd be a prerequisite. When I think about connected city and this being an entire mode that people should be able to depend on, I'd like to look forward to a day when a person can get off there and be a stranger to town. And you're putting so much into this already. I don't know why that with some kind of diligence that couldn't be solved. But at any rate, I want to thank you for doing it and for thinking of the bike rack too.
Sure, yeah. Margaret, did you have anything to add to that discussion?
Well, I was going to say that one of the things that I'm most looking forward to is being able to tell people who want to get to Amtrak that there is a way to get there that won't require planning it in advance when you don't know how late the train is. And so, JT, I'm really hoping that everyone has a better experience with something that's more in the moment, because if you see that your train is 30 minutes out, you can make the request and have or an hour out, let's say, and plan to be there and not have to wait for hours when the train is a few hours late. And a lot of the train trips arriving are at times of night when I'm pretty sure are not peak times for Nightline. So I think that the likelihood that the wait time would be very long is probably going to be fairly low. And communication is always our biggest hurdle in anything transit, and I'm sure that the city staff will be doing a lot of that, but we'll also be contributing to that with all of the KU students who use Amtrak. From the Safe Ride perspective, I can tell you that in general, our average wait time throughout the entire year last year, regardless of, it's an average of slow nights and busy nights, is 14 minutes. And so I think that's a pretty reasonable amount of wait time compared to the 20 or 30 or 45 minutes that people have experienced in the past, and or the need to schedule it so far ahead. I think the trade-offs will be big enough that people will like the service.
Further question, may I?
Yeah, you can continue.
Okay, I don't know much about Safe Ride. Are you saying that it's a complementary or even a substitute for what's being presented today?
No, it's the student version of it for KU students alone. It's private for students, but it's on the same platform. And so knowing that they're driving their vehicles in the same footprint, that on demand will work and in the similar hours, and using the same platform when this goes live is what I'm basing that comment on. The Safe Ride gave 32,000 rides home to students late at night last year.
Okay, well, if you're coming, trying to think, if you're coming into Lawrence at night, your last opportunity to have a significant delay would be at DeSoto. And so you wouldn't necessarily, and that happens, so you wouldn't necessarily know when you were going to get there, even though it's 15 minutes away. So I don't know. You guys are on your way to getting there, but it is since it's a major transportation mode. I would look forward to a day when it was dependable for all users, and if possible, with only a phone call where somebody doesn't have to use an app if they're not familiar with it. Thank you.
I would just say that Austin can maybe speak better to this because he has experience using the Safe Ride app, but it is possible to adjust your times, or if something happens to delay you, cancel your ride and request it when you know that the train has started moving again. So if people do know about it, hopefully they'll have the flexibility that they wouldn't have had with Nightline to make those adjustments. I wonder, Adam, if you'll be able to help find a way to get in touch with Amtrak about how to publicize it to their people who are booking tickets to Lawrence. That might be an interesting way to help notify people about it.
Yeah, we'll have to explore. We do have some contacts of the folks who have been attendants over there at the depot, so I think we'll probably start there. But I think information sharing is a good first step.
Thank you.
And this is Austin Stifler, PTAC member. After hearing everybody, to JT's comments and questions, I think one thing that is kind of configurable within that spare application that is shared between SafeRide and what's going to replace on demand. I think that one of the features that the city can kind of configure would be adding in, kind of that ability to have recurring trips or perhaps scheduled trips, which of course, if the train is delayed, that might not work in that case. But for instance, with the SafeRide app, the way that things are configured now, someone could, in theory, cancel that trip and say, well, I'm going to wait to go home, or I'm going to wait to book a ride. And they could always either reschedule that for a different time, or they could rebook that at a different time. So I think that will allow some flexibility. I don't think there will be any type of, say, penalization if someone does end up getting in a little bit later and rebooking that ride.
Thank you, Austin. JT. I only had two questions for myself, Adam. One is based on slide 4 that talks about finalizing Android app availability. What about iOS? Is there one that's already available, or is that planned?
Yeah, so when this slide deck was made, iOS was in good shape, and we faced a couple of hurdles recently. So actually, iOS right now is needing another day or so of work for it to become available. So
Okay.
there will be.
So it's planned at least.
Yeah, there will be
Okay.
apps available in all the app stores. We're just finalizing that availability.
Works for me then. Thank you. The last thing that I wanted to hit on is the next slide. I see that the second screenshot has a indicator for a credit card to be listed there. Is the intent that we wouldn't need to use that at all because we're ostensibly free through the end of this year and potentially could be through 2024, depending on what we discuss?
That's correct. Yeah, these are some stock images that they kind of slot our info into, and so it's typical for them to show that. For people to sign up, it is required that they provide us with their name and phone number. A phone number is what ties their account to their device, so that we know who we're booking a trip for. But they won't have to provide a credit card for a fare-free trip.
We have that on ours too. They can't remove it from the standard setup of the app.
Okay. That's kind of annoying. UX perspective, I would love to see that go away when it's explicitly a free thing, because I'm sure that'll be really confusing to some people.
It's been on my list for a while. They know that we'd like that too.
Okay. Thank you, Margareta. No, that's all questions I have. So just one quick sweep. Does anyone else on the call or have any further questions, including people who already asked them? Okay. Hearing nothing, thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda then is update on the K10 connector partnership.
Yes, give me just a second here. Okay, wanted to provide some updates on some continuing discussions with Johnson County regarding the K10 connector. So, set some background. The K10 connector is a commuter service that travels between Johnson County and Douglas County. It touches base at Johnson County Community College, the KU Edwards campus, and of course the campus here at KU. It's been a service that's been fare-free since KCATA across all of its services went fare-free in 2019. In 2014, the city began supporting this service with some annual funding, and there's a current memorandum of understanding, a legal document between the city and Johnson County that expires at the end of this calendar year. Some overview of what that funding from the city to Johnson County has looked like since 2014 through this year, with ridership shown on the right side of the screen, just to orient you to kind of how our costs have increased over the years. We've kind of locked in since 2019 at that $155,000 annually. Ridership from the service side has been decreasing, of course, took a big hit with the pandemic and has remained pretty low. For context, I put at the bottom of this screen the total annual service cost to support the entire route is $1.7 million. So just wanted you to kind of understand that big number as it relates to the amount of money that the city provides as supplement to the service. So we were in the middle of a pandemic when our MOU was expiring with Johnson County the last time. We worked with them to negotiate just a 2-year extension as opposed to what was a 5-year MOU, just to get us through, buy us some breathing room time during the pandemic. And so we signed that 2-year extension in 2021. At that time, in my role, I asked that Johnson County do some additional engagement with Johnson County Community College and KU, given that those are the two largest users of that system between our two communities. Not that I had high expectations for either university, who's cash-strapped for different reasons through state education funding and caps on tuition, but I did want there to be some discussion since the city was the only additional funding partner. There's been some additional discussions this year between Johnson County, KU, and the city, and also identified Douglas County and KDOT as some additional partners who should be in discussions about funding or supporting the service that crosses this jurisdiction and affects a lot of different municipalities, counties, organizations. Worth noting that with that MOU expiring, we don't currently have funding support for Johnson County starting in 2024. Again, since we've had some of these discussions in 2023, and given the large dollar amount of the service overall, the funding that the city provides to Johnson County, if that goes away, Johnson County has not indicated that would be cause for eliminating the service, but certainly a reduction in trips, likely in some of the lower capacity times of the year, such as summer or off semester times, would likely be adjustments that Johnson County would need to consider. Just to place some context around, as we are looking toward our future budgets, what $155,000 means to the city as far as value. We're being very strategic in really every line item in our budget and thinking about how it moves the needle on strategic plan initiatives that the city has. And so this isn't an exhaustive list, but these are 4 kind of easily digestible, I think, pieces of our annual budget that cost around $150,000. So that cost is roughly half the service cost of a fixed route. It is all of our capital improvements that we make to bus stops. So when we buy shelters and benches annually, trash cans, that's in the neighborhood of $150,000. It's about a third the cost, I would say, of our fare-free service. I'm thinking about the revenue that we're not bringing in due to fare-free. And it is about the annual cost of all our different technology platforms. So we just talked about one of them that's grant funded right now, but there's a number of other technology programs that we use, both onboard buses and the current app that we use for riders, route planning tools, different things. So Right now, there is agreement, certainly between the city, KU, and Johnson County to keep having discussions, and certainly looping in Douglas County and KDOT on just how we approach this route moving forward, so that it feels like a partnership that everyone's interested in, or has buy-in to the strategy for how it's funded and ran. Really, I will just say, just from my experience working in other communities as well, any cross-jurisdictional service can be a challenge when it comes to setting service levels and funding and operations. And so we're kind of at that point with this one, with different agencies needing to really consider the value that's coming out of a service like this versus how much money is going into it. That is a relatively short presentation to give you some context of where we're headed. Like I mentioned, certainly a lot more meetings to be had between the different organizations involved in this, but I'm happy to answer any questions or concerns that any folks have.
Thank you, Adam. JT, you raised your hand and you should go first.
Thank you. A question or two and then probably a comment. Do I gather that KU does not contribute any cash to the K10 connector?
That's correct.
Okay. I used to ride that. In fact, I think I started riding it was part of my introduction to riding our public bus system, which had just begun, if I recall. At any rate, it was my impression that the majority of my fellow passengers were KU students, or maybe Johnson County students who were coming to KU. Do you have any figures on that?
The information that we were provided from Johnson County indicates from surveying that it's about half and half.
Half and half what?
Half KU and half people going towards Johnson County.
Or coming from Johnson County? Public you're talking about?
Half KU students and half JCCC. That's the way they said it to us. I don't really know for a fact how exactly they counted it.
Okay, it sounds like then the figures you got did not include the public going one way or both.
I just mean that the way that they specified it to us, whether it was half KU students and half not, they didn't tell us the breakdown further than that in the meeting that we were talking about all of this in.
Yeah, okay, well, I'm not complaining at you for that.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just saying I don't know beyond the half KU and half not.
Yeah, well, here's one member of the public. I wasn't either a KU student or a Johnson County student. I don't think I was neither at the time, and I rode it for about 5 years as a way of getting a bike over to Kansas City and back without biking all the way. I learned to do that later. My other question is, when I first started riding the K10 connector, they had a bike rack on front, and if you got there when it was already loaded up, and sometimes it was, you were out of luck. You had to wait till the next go around. Then they started using a bus that had a bike bay underneath, and that solved that problem. Am I correct in assuming that would still be the case with these buses?
So
I think so.
Yeah, and I've ridden the K10 connector myself as well. I believe they use I think they only have over-the-road coach buses they use at this point on that service, which do include, is that not true, or do they use some city buses?
I have seen a couple of regular city buses. They try to use the over-the-road coach as much as possible, but there are some service levels where they have to send a regular bus too. I've seen both outside of our office.
Well, it's,
I think they're not supposed to use the regular buses on the highway to carry with the bike racks on the front. I think there's some kind of a safety code on that. Somebody could correct me on that, but I believe there's something that makes that
No.
not preferable for safety reasons.
I'm sure that's probably true that there would be some preferences not to, but I think that there are times when that's their only choice in order to have the right number of buses. But regardless, that I expect they would continue providing those same vehicles as long as they're providing the service. That's what the over-the-road coaches are for. I don't think they use it in other service.
well, it's a wonderful service. Thank you.
So Lance Fay, PTAC, I want to kind of chime in on a couple things here. Let's keep in mind that the K-10 connector is run by Johnson County, and they get a considerable amount of state funding. They get a lot more funding than we do. And so a lot of the things that we're asking about are things that are going to have to be answered ultimately by them. Another thing that I've noticed over the years, the route that they take through Lawrence has changed quite a bit, and it can sometimes be a bit confusing. I've used the service as a general member of the public, and although, yes, you can go find out where they're stopping and at what time, there isn't really any specific signage, and especially a couple of their stops on campus are frequently rerouted with little or no notice, sometimes to basketball games or other construction things. And so in addition to COVID, some of the ridership decrease is going to come just out of pure confusion and just, not being able to get to your bus, or you get there and it's not going to go on that route because, the change in the route has not been communicated. And so I think there's some route and logistical things there that, as this service goes forward, maybe we need to look at where those routes are going and how they could be more reliable, and have a further discussion as to, what level of participation should all parties involved have. Another thing is, as a member of the public, if you're going from KU to Johnson County JUCO, once you get off that K-10 connector bus, there are very limited options for other public transportation routes in Johnson County. There are some, but they are very limited. And so there's going to have to be some more regional conversations in order for this service to be worth the financial investment that we're making and perhaps even more in the future. I mean, as of right now, it doesn't really serve as well as it should. And it can be very confusing and unreliable as far as where the routes do and don't show up. So I think there's some work to do in order to continue doing it.
One final comment.
Sure, JT, go ahead.
Okay, I used to stay on the bus and go south to the Edwards campus, and I assume it still does that. From the Edwards campus, you get on, what's that, Corvera? Get on Corvera and you go about a mile south and you get on the Indian Creek Trail, and you can go clear over into Missouri on a bike. I used to do that, and I depended on doing it. So it's not the case that there is no, when you consider all modes, it's not the case that there isn't connectivity. Thank you. That's enough for me.
Yeah, and I appreciate Lance's comments. I might share too. I mean, I think as we've been having these meetings, I think there's understanding around the room with different agencies that, regional service is important, and it does take cars off the road, and it is a thing that we ultimately want. It is very tricky, based on some of the comments you made, Lance. One agency does have to run it, and the others can, work to try to influence and work together and try to make it the most useful as possible for everybody that's hopping on. But it's sure not a simple thing to coordinate, and I think some of those challenges have been there for many years, and I think we're starting to have, maybe more serious discussions about value to everyone who uses it and wants to use it, wants it to do certain things. So, yeah, good notes about some of the challenges that they're facing.
Can I add one thing? Adam, will you go back to that slide about the ridership? I wanted to make one note that part of how we look at ridership at KU and how we're prioritizing where we put the funding from student fees is that total ridership number. And if you consider that half of each of these numbers, approximately based on the Jefferson County Transit's estimates, are KU students, even at the highest number in 2015, 122,000, half of that number is about 61,000 students. That is lower ridership numbers than most of the KU routes had that year. And so part of how we would choose to fund a route often depends on how much ridership we get for that dollar amount and effectively use our money. And these numbers would actually make this the first route we would cut funding from if it was in the mix of things we were funding. Just for a perspective on how we look at these numbers in comparison to the other service that we provide.
Thank you for this discussion, everyone. Definitely in agreement. It seems like, based on the money that you're quoting, Adam, 122,000 is decent ridership. 46,000 is significantly less. Hard to know what I would want to spend that money on, but thank you for sharing this information with us, at least. Before we go on from this topic, does anybody else have last lingering comments, questions, concerns? Okay. Next item on the agenda is just the PTAC members. Do you have anything that you want to talk about today that wasn't already on the agenda? Okay. Not giving you a lot of time, but I'm assuming not. So if you do have anything that you want added to the agenda for October's meeting, feel free to email Adam, Lance, and myself. We'll gladly talk about just about anything that you want to talk about relating to Lawrence Transit. Next item on the agenda then is the copious list of transit staff items. Adam.
Thank you. No.
I assume you want to start at the top and then work your way down.
Might as well, yeah. Quite a long list here. I figured we've got a lot of irons in the fire, clearly, so just wanted to run down the list and give you at least a quick sense of where we're at, provide some opportunity to ask questions if you have it. The first one is we are making great progress over at Central Station. Hopefully you've been able to see some of the update photos we've been pushing out through social media every week or two. And we're at the point where it is a pretty interesting site to walk around with a hard hat and high visibility vest on. So wanted to offer that idea to this group as an option in lieu of our October meeting. Would this group be interested in a walk around tour of Central Station? At that point, the site should be pretty well finished with the exception of punch list items. So kind of final details that we'll be working through. The building itself is currently on track to be complete sometime in the mid-November. So there will still be some work going on in the building, but should be quite a bit done. So just wanted to offer that as discussion. I know that we don't have a quorum here today, but if there's any, just so I can understand some interest from those who are here on that sort of.
I am definitely interested. Anybody else? PTAC members, Alan, Lance, Austin?
Bill Eklund, PTAC member. Yeah, be interested in do that as long as we don't have to do any real work.
So you're saying in lieu of a meeting, so instead of the meeting, we just go to a tour of the facility, is what you're suggesting?
Correct.
Okay, that's, as long as there's not any pressing business that we need to take care of, that, and we can just skip the regular meeting and do the tour, I'd be down with it, yeah.
Austin Stifler, PTAC member, I would also be interested in taking a tour.
Okay. And certainly, yeah, if there is, I don't foresee pressing, things we really absolutely need to vote on in October, but if we do, we'll navigate that. And if there is something that comes up, would the group be interested in a tour separate from the typical meeting, like on a different day and time?
I probably would still be.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we can navigate that.
Yep.
We'll just try to give enough notice where if there are members of the public who want to join, they can as well. We'll probably have an RSVP list so that we make sure there's a manageable sized group that can make it out there. And yeah, Austin?
Austin Stifler again. One thing I was wondering, just kind of spitballing, would there maybe be an option for a virtual tour as well if members of the public who might not be able to attend would like to see?
Let me marinate on that. I'm trying to think about what that would look like.
Alec and PTAC member, maybe get some drone footage.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly got a lot of pictures that we're pushing out every week with kind of progress update photos. So at minimum, we could take some photos and have there be a photo record. Video or something like that might be a little more tricky, but we can think about that. Okay, well, I'll keep moving down the list here. Transit rider suspension policy, this group helped us massage some of our discussion around that. We've got paper materials that should be delivered middle of this week. So just a heads up that this will start to be operationalized sometime this month. So we'll talk that through again with our operations team once those forms arise. But again, we're hoping this can be a little more formal tool to help with a small number of folks, just that we're having some transit behavioral issues with. I'll pause briefly. Any thoughts or questions on that bullet?
JT.
I want to thank you for addressing that. One of the last times I wrote on it was on the one. There was an individual on there who was making the ride so obnoxious and unpleasant for everyone that I feared for the the future of Lawrence Public Transit. So I'm glad you're addressing that, and thank you.
Yep. Okay. Our next phase of electric bus, the 2 additional Gillig buses, we have a current date of expected delivery by mid-December of this year. Where the one piece that is kind of driving that build date is battery availability. They're using a different battery system for the second build than they did with the first. Should help with more range and some different things, but we do get an update from them about every week or 10 days about where they're at with the batteries, which is kind of the critical path right now. So we'll keep you updated on that as we get a little more firm, build schedule for our next couple of buses. Phase 3 are 2 different styles of buses, one of which are Proterra 40-foot buses that have the longest range that we have been able to procure so far. You may have seen some news about Chapter 11 bankruptcy of that company. So I've been learning a lot about bankruptcy and the different chapters of bankruptcy and what it means. So we're in conversations with Proterra every couple of weeks at this point. The path essentially is, so Chapter 11 is a reorganization version of bankruptcy. They're going to have to sell 3 different pieces of their company. One is the transit bus component. They have a charger business, which we won't be participating in, and they have batteries that they use in other non-Proterra vehicles, which is also important to us because our electric cutaways are powered by the battery system that Proterra provides. So we'll be very interested in the sale of Proterra's transit business, their bus building business, as well as their battery business. It's our understanding that they've been entertaining bidders for the last few months. I believe it's our expectation October, November is when any formal agreement or sale will happen. And at that point, we'll start to have a lot more clarity on future of those companies. I will say on the transit side of the business, they have a lot of projects in the timeline. Everyone I've talked to from other transit agencies, from our current consultant that helps us with electric bus project management, with other transit professionals, there's not a lot of concern that the businesses will just go away, that they'll fail and go away. Everyone is pretty confident that they'll be sold to someone and continue on. But like I said, it'll be a couple of months before there's greater clarity on that. The good news for us from a flexibility perspective is our buses do not enter the line for build on Proterra until they're scheduled like mid next year to enter the line. So we've got quite a bit of time before we're locked in to something that we'd have to fear, wouldn't be a company that exists or would be able to honor the 12-year battery warranties that we're buying. And so that's the good news, if you will, throughout this type of challenging news. But we'll certainly keep this group and the public updated as we get more specifics on what sale means and what moving forward means. And if that means continuation with what we've procured, if it means do we have to make some larger pivot like backing out and seeking a different bus manufacturer for phase 3, which I currently don't think is likely, but it would be probably a legal option we have, given that we haven't entered the manufacturing line with Proterra yet. So that's about the extent of what I know, but I'm happy to try to answer other questions.
So the low-no grant plan that the federal government runs, that we aren't locked into Proterra necessarily, even though that was what was in our original offer for the grant money?
So we followed the appropriate federal grant procedure of identifying a partner ahead of the grant, so that made our procurement a lot easier. With a situation like this and with the way our contracts are written, there is a legal path for us to seek a different option, and I would expect our Region 7 FTA office to help facilitate something like that if we absolutely had to. So locked in, I think it becomes a lot less locked in when we're talking about bankruptcy. That becomes there's some legal opening for maneuvering at that point. It would create a new probably federal procurement process for us, which would not be the most fun thing to have to go back and do, where we'd have to create an RFP, spec out what bus we want. It wouldn't be as simple as just identifying a different manufacturer that we want to work with. But there'd be a path there.
Okay. Thank you.
Other thoughts on electric bus, either phase 2 or 3? Okay. Next item on the list is transit app launch and real-time location. So we've known for a while that our current rider app, My Bus Lawrence, powered by Double Map, is sunsetting. And so we've been planning on what the next thing is for us. Transit app is a application that works in a couple hundred cities worldwide, and has been a desirable next step for us. Now that app is the public-facing piece, but it does not provide the real-time location. So real-time location is provided by, will be provided by a company called Swiftly, which was one of our AIC state projects, that will help us get real-time information that will be made available, so that when people use the transit app, they can see where buses are at in real time. There will likely be another transition, hopefully that the public won't even notice, but another transition once we get a new computer-aided dispatch system into next year that will also provide real-time information to power transit app. But all that said, we're looking at likely the last quarter of this year. It's possible it could be as early as November, but I think November, December, looking at the opportunity to have a new public-facing app that not only has real-time location, but also the ability to plan your trip, which is something our current option doesn't have that option. So wanted to list that project as in the works. Certainly anything really on the remainder of this list is going to have press releases and social media associated with it with greater detail, but an early heads up on that project.
How is that app going to interact with the on-demand app that we talked about earlier today?
We have some questions. We've been exploring the ability to have a single app in the future. The technology is really not quite there yet. So for now, it's going to be two separate things. You'll use one app for all your fixed route needs, a different one for your microtransit needs. Right now, that's not a huge deal because our services don't overlap. If in the future we have on-demand services operating at the same time as fixed route services, we really would want to try to figure out a trip planning app that helps you combine those two things, so that if you're taking a trip across town, you know, I will use on-demand for this portion, and then I'll hop on a fixed route bus for the last part. But for now, they'll be completely separate.
Okay.
Next item on the list is digital signage and automated next stop announcements. So we're working through contracting still with a company to provide, it's both interior and exterior signs. So interior signs will have information about next stops, audio announcements for clear ADA announcements so that passengers can hear what the next stop is. It'll also have the opportunity to present some other static information inside the bus. If you think about some of the things we do with paper posters today, take our survey, come to this city engagement event, routes are changing, that sort of information can be presented on the digital screen as well. We're also adding rear destination signs to a number of buses that don't currently have them. So as people approach buses from the rear, they'll be able to more easily see what route that bus is, which will be helpful. So hopefully we can get some of that work moving by the last quarter of this year. I'm sure that will bleed over into the first part of next year. We have a new branding bus wraps project that we're working through. This is another AIC project. Really, I guess everything remaining on this list is an AIC grant project. So we'll be rewrapping all of our buses, both fixed route and paratransit, with some new branding that pushes the Lawrence Transit branding to the front of every bus and adds some new City of Lawrence branding to the rear of every bus. And so working through that procurement process and expect that to be complete in the first quarter of next year.
Are we planning on keeping KU buses and Lawrence buses with different branding wraps?
Short answer would be yes.
So far.
Yeah, short answer would be yes. Yeah, there's continued discussions. We've got some more engagement work internally to do to talk about visually what joint branding means. But this project hopefully kind of sets ourselves up to transition to something more cohesive in the future. I do think, in a large sense, you should expect to continue to see Jayhawks on KU buses and continue to see some city branding on city buses. And there's some options for us to have some coordinated components that could tie us together a little bit. So we're working on it.
It's a goal. We've been working on it for a while.
Zero emission transition plan. So this is something on the horizon. I just wanted you all to have it on your radar as well. So grant funded project. We plan to start this work in the first quarter of next year. So next year will be a planning process, a pretty technical process, maybe not quite the same as a lot of the very public engagement focused processes like route changes and central station and things like that. This particular plan is a lot more focused on how do we functionally fit enough charging infrastructure where we want it to be? How do we afford it? How do we maintain service levels while we transition to technologies that are rapidly changing? But certainly there will be some engagement and a whole lot of information as well as we work through that process. But that plan will help us have a better glide path towards moving beyond these first 3 phases of electric buses we've done that I would consider kind of our pilot projects, 3 of them in a row, but to a certain extent pilots still. And then how do we get to completely fixed route zero emission or completely fleet-wide zero emission, which is close to 50 vehicles. That's a much different ballgame than 11 vehicles. And then the last thing he listed here, I also wanted to have on your radar is with Central Station and our need to focus on getting that done. The work on Downtown Station was put on hold after we did not get advancement from City Commission on a preferred site. So we're committing to restarting that public engagement process in 2024, planning on really the entirety of 2024 being a public engagement site selection process for where's the best spot for us to fit downtown improvements that are functional and useful for the next few decades. So that's going to be a big effort. We're doing some early groundwork with some downtown businesses just to make sure they're not surprised that this is coming. But certainly there will be a lot of work next year on that project. So long list tonight. I appreciate you sticking with me through it, but I just wanted to make sure all of these different project initiatives were known to everybody and weren't surprises to anyone. And again, happy to answer any other questions, and all these projects will come back up into more formal agenda items in the future, I'm sure.
Thank you, Adam. JT, PTAC members, Ginger, Margreta, anything that you want to bring up from that list, knowing that we're basically at the end of our agenda?
I don't think so. We're off to a great start this fall. It's been kind of busy.
Good to hear. Well, in that event, hopefully we will have enough people in attendance on October 9th for our next meeting so that we will officially have quorum, although based on today's discussion, we may end up making that a walking meeting at the Central Station, which I would definitely look forward to. I'm sure Adam, Lance, and I will be in discussions about what our plan is for the October meeting specifically, and if we do decide to make it a tour of the facility, we'll send an email to let everyone know that we're canceling the formal meeting and PTAC members are going to meet at the facility itself. So with that said, unless someone has one last thing, I'll give you 5 seconds. Okay. With that, we are, since we didn't have a formal meeting, we aren't formally adjourned, but we are done with our agenda. So thank you for those of you who attended, and look forward to seeing you all in October.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Bunch of us.